In the terms of the collection's beginning, it's sort of like a lot of our collections has odd beginnings. We started in entomology as a department of economic entomology, and like a lot of departments, we had odd affiliations with zoology, and people split and then went every which way. We have, like some of you mentioned, we have different colleges involved, where we're in the College of Ag and Life Science, but botany and zoology are in the College of Letter and Science. And so early in the 50s, I guess we sort of have our story start. The collection was beginning to take really good form by that time, and it was on the other side of campus in King Hall. I tried to pin down who actually was in charge of the collection at that time, and the best we could come up with was there was a rotating instructor that was the person who was going to be teaching the insect identification course. And so, again, like a lot of the history you've already heard, many of the collections had at least a part of their beginning role was that of instruction and supporting the instructional program. Early on, about a half a dozen cabinets, and like people have been saying all along, a lot of contributions from faculty, staff, and student donations. The first person that I could actually find an actual name to attach to the collection was Charles Fluke, who was in the department from 1916 to 1958. Now, he didn't serve as the, I guess what we would use the term director, the way we're set up, of the collection that entire period of time, but that would be the first name that comes into our historical perspective. Roy Schoenfeld was the director from the time Fluke left until 1977, at which time Jane Harrington came in and took over until 91, and thereafter me. And like I believe it was Greg mentioning, I'm one of these oddballs too that have a very significant instructional component to my breakdown of appointment. So I'm 75% teaching, 20% research, and then I get a 5% sort of nominal appointment to serve as director of the collection. And of course, as many of you know, my interests are primarily with beetles. Curatorially, we've had three curators that actually had that as their mission. Lutz Baer and John Baker, the first two. And from what I can understand, those were originally largely on soft money. They were largely associated with Hatch money. Again, being a land-grant university, we as a department allocate portions of a Hatch project to support them. When I came in, Steve Krauth had already been there working for some period of time as the curator. And at that time, we were pretty much half Hatch money and half solid state money for his position. And then when I assumed the directorship, we weren't able to do much, but one of the carrots they did toss me was we were able to get that curatorial position 100% on state dollars now, so there is no soft money associated with it anymore. Some of the associations that we have, I highlighted Craig's name. Craig's with me here. He is the person that is on the grant for our project. Some of my current grad students are listed, and also some folks that many of them were former graduate students and have gone elsewhere but stayed on, at least nominally. We have a zero appointment that we call the honorary fellow appointment. And many of those students, former students, are still making some pretty significant contributions, coming in pretty regularly. Anthony, you mentioned a lot of the people. Where'd you go? He's hiding somewhere. Some of those long train of folks you have that fortunately never go away, even though they're doing lots of other things, and we have some of those as well. When the building opened that we're currently in, Russell Labs, the collection moved from King Hall down to Russell Labs. We have about 1,141 square feet, and that includes the curatorial office, some prep rooms, a small, it's more of a reprint collection room. I wouldn't really call it a library, but it's sort of, they historically arranged it with folders, and each taxon got a folder, and historically, Fluke and Schoenfeld were good at ripping up journals and sticking separates into these folders. So if you wanted a folder on Acarai, you could go, and we could probably find several of them full of crazy things from anywhere on the planet. You don't know what's in those things. But what that nets out then is to about 830 square feet actual collection footprint, and that's on the third floor, largely on the third floor of Russell Labs. We do have some other buildings where some other things that are attached to the collection are stored. Most importantly, perhaps, would be our auto montage system down on the first floor, which also has a space in the back for one of our honorary fellows. As we currently are configured in the Russell Labs facility, which I guess we'd call our historical or main part of the collection, we at the moment have the Paraneoptera and most of the holometabolous things minus Trichoptera and Lepidoptera, and I'll explain why that is in just a moment. My office and Suite of Labs, and where my students are, is located one floor up on the fourth floor. With that kind of footprint, all the way back from the time that Jane Harrington was here, we were desperately trying to get new space. And those of you who have visited the Madison area know how incredibly brilliant our founders were in taking the state capitol and finding two very gigantic lakes and then building a city in between them and putting the campus in between all that. So being on an isthmus, space is even more of a difficult challenge than some of us normally are used to in a university setting. So for years and years and years we were looking for additional space, and finally a few years back one of the deans took me over to the Stock Pavilion, which sounds like an odd place to have a collection because it is still a Stock Pavilion. But up on the third floor there was an old, I guess it was at one time a dairy research lab, and then it sort of became a dairy junkyard, and that with a massive amount of vision was able to, and with a little bit of help from the university, be able to remodel. And you see in the image there a view of the main of about 4 rooms, the main room of this new 1,841 square feet. That opened just a couple of years ago. So in one of the other rooms, the room that you see is dedicated to Lepidoptera, Trichoptera, and some fairly substantial holdings of aquatic insects. We had a lifelong researcher at Madison that was an aquatic entomologist, and when he retired, he passed along his aquatic collection to us, which was around 175,000 specimens, almost all of them from Wisconsin. And so it's a very good collection. Ed DeWalt's been up and worked up our Plecops and is coming back up to do some more stuff. Maybe you could figure out how to put those Plecops away because they're still sitting where they were. Anyway, we had a couple of opportunities in our history to take on some fairly substantial collections of leps and had to say thanks but no thanks, we just don't have the space. So now, for the first time ever, we really have the space to add to our tricops and leps, and we have a recent former student of mine that is a real lep nut enthusiast, and he's adding very substantively to the leps and spending a lot of time over there curating as well. So we've got a lot of room for growth in that part of the collection, which is amazing. And of course, having moved all of that out of the regular facility, we were able to add a massive amount of space there as well. I mentioned, and I didn't really hear much of this from others of you today. I mention it because I guess maybe it's because of my appointment being 75% teaching, but I do want to make special note to mention our teaching collections in our 2 major entomology teaching labs down on the first floor, about 15 cabinets, 24-door cabinets. And I mention this in part because, like I suspect a lot of you, when it comes to needing specimens, it falls back in our laps to make those specimens happen, keep them curated, keep taking care of the things that are constantly being broken. So it's a substantial part of the time that I spend and my curator as well in making sure that we have the support materials for our instructional program as well. In terms of strategies that relate to the scope and strength, we have about 3 million specimens in the 2 facilities now, and this would be curated a pinpoint mounted slide, filed specimens. We, like many of you have mentioned already today, are doing a lot of survey work, particularly in the state. Paul mentioned the black hole of South Dakota. I challenge any of you to look at the distribution map of the taxon that you work on, if there's a nice map of the U.S., and you'll see that there are points all the way around us and nothing in Wisconsin and South Dakota. So even though you would think we're kind of a Midwestern state, we should know what's here, no one's ever really done much in the way of inventory of the state. So I start a lot of my master's level graduate students and advanced undergrads in getting to know a little bit about a taxon by looking at what's in the state, getting familiar with the taxonomy, the literature, and so on. So it's been a good way to train, but it's also been a great way to add a lot of material. Of course, that leaves us, like many of you, with literally millions of specimens that are in bulk that will be there long after we're all gone. But nonetheless, a massive accumulation of material that is well labeled and there for the future, because with the landscape changing constantly, it's important to be doing that. Our strengths are pretty much what everyone else has said. The largest orders of insects tend to be the ones that get most of the attention, and that's no different with us. By virtue of particularly the survey work, our average over the past 5 or 6 years is about 21,000 specimens per year additions. And again, that's curated material. That wouldn't include the 30,000 specimens a week out of Malaise traps that just sit somewhere. Some of our most noteworthy holdings. I mentioned one of our first directors, Fluke, was a syrphid specialist, and one of the best syrphid collections, at least university collections in North America, is housed with us. The nucleus of our collection actually came from a zoologist by the name of Marshall, who, when he exited the zoology department during some of those early splits, moved his material over, and that sort of, I mean, he's kind of like our Blatchley. He would be the one that we would say is the nucleus of our collection. Gene DeFolier was a medical entomologist with us during his career, and when he retired, a little bit thereafter, he donated a number of specimens, largely of medical interest, culicids, lice, and chlorophids. And then Bob Dick, who was largely a morphologist, but I didn't realize, no one did until we found all this stuff up in a cabin that he had up north. They had an extensive mosquito collection, and so we inherited that eventually as well. A fellow by the name of Dennis was a membracid specialist. I believe he spent much of his career down at Whitewater. I think he even published a little lab manual at one point in time, but he donated his treehopper collection to us. I already mentioned Bill Hiltonoff, the extensive Wisconsin aquatic insect collection. Walt Suter, some of you might know, was a beetle worker down in Kenosha College, and when he retired a little bit thereafter, was doing a labor love survey project up north of us in Moshera County, and accumulated the equivalent of a cabinet, 24-door cabinet material that we were given. Recently, an underwing collection, not particularly large, but kind of interesting because it dated all from most of it from southeastern Wisconsin, and southeastern Wisconsin doesn't really look much now the way it did back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, so historically a pretty useful thing. I have, over the years, from the time that I swam across the lake from Michigan State, where I did all my undergraduate and graduate work to Wisconsin, then gradually donating my really large beetle collection to, most of it to the collection that we have at Madison. We certainly would say, again, in part because of our land-grant mission, but because of our interests, I would say our primary strength, without any question, are in the state. That's our major mission, and that is an area that I've discovered really needs to be enhanced because of the lack of knowledge. Secondary strength, I would say just the Great Lakes region as a whole, again, in part because of the large amount of stuff that I traipsed across from Michigan with me when I came. And then sort of a nominal but tertiary strength worldwide. Like many collections, you can open drawers and never know what you're going to come up with. We have a substantial collection. Fluke spent a lot of time in Nigeria, and we've got a lot of Nigerian material, and a bunch of stuff from Costa Rica that, you know, when a former faculty member might have been down there for a few years. So we do have some treasures there that we don't even exactly know exactly what we have yet. In terms of digitization, we have me, 5% director, and we have 100% curator, and we have a bunch of students. And as I constantly lament, and I'm sure many of you do as well, you can only do so much with the time and resources that are available. And given what we don't know about our state, I've kind of committed most of our time to doing the collecting and trying to get people interested in systematics and getting to be a little bit familiar with what we do. And so growing the collection, growing our knowledge base is where I've invested what little resources we have. We have had small efforts with particular projects, particular groups, early on with biota, and then we discovered that just wasn't going to be keeping up with us. We have some other projects that are in FileMaker files, a couple in Excel spreadsheets. There's a Nasita National Wildlife Refuge. We've got a considerable amount of material and also a couple of different Excel spreadsheets for that material. We also have collections that are going to be coming to us. That if you ask them, they would say they're ours, but they're not on site yet, with the Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, DAPCAP, and also the Wisconsin DNR. They maintain a fairly substantial collection, and yet they constantly say it's destined to come to us, but they need it a little longer. And I know in the DNR they've got their own internal databasing system that I fear only they will be able to figure out. But some of the material, including the material that Craig's working on most actively now, he's already moved over to specify, and we've been trying to clean up a lot of the other stuff from biota and get it prepared. We're in the queue to be put on to into specify as soon as that comes up. We actually do I think it's a reasonable amount of outreach with a little bit myself and a lot with my curator. I asked him for what he thought about a 3-year average would be, and he came up with about 1,800 individuals per year. That would be teachers, students, other organizations. These would be people that would largely come to us, and what we generally do, like a lot of you, we have a lot of summer programs that bring kids to campus, and that includes some of those numbers as well. What it does not include, I can't remember which one of you, somebody said you have a lot of your grad students do the site visits, the K-12 site visits. We do that as well. We have a group called Insect Ambassadors, which is largely where we get some of our graduates and undergraduates involved in. Those numbers don't include those visits, which are considerable. I would say I don't know, Craig, they maybe do almost one a week, it seems like. They're always looking for folks to do those. The university has a little university PR program where they like to go out and drum up support around the state, and they like to have those of us with what they call the Ys and Wows, so ourselves and wildlife ecologists and the physicists and the chemists and the geologists are usually traipse around and go out and do some outreach programs. We've served a number of sites in Wisconsin, but also they've invited us over to Minnesota. Well, that was only once. They didn't want us back for some reason. Illinois, actually they invited us once and didn't. Shedd Aquarium doesn't like you to bring live insects in, I've discovered. They didn't want us back. So I mentioned the Insect Ambassadors, the site for them. One of my colleagues over in zoology a couple of years ago, about 3 or 4 years ago, put together a museum studies course, and we've been a very active participant in that course with them, and we have a few students come over every semester, and that usually generates 1 or 2 internships. We've got a couple of students doing internships with us now, largely helping us sort lay samples as a result of that project. It's a very tightly bound organizational sort of a flow between our instruction and our collections. I guess that sort of is because of where I'm placed, but I use my advanced taxonomy series, my 700 level series, as a way to begin to import students at an undergrad and early graduate stage into the collection, not only to provide a few things for us, but also to develop it to them, hopefully, a little sense of what it is to work in a collection and see the value of collections. Most of, well, at least a good share of those students aren't going to go on and become taxonomists, but it's probably very useful that they've put that time in there. So with that, well, we gained a few minutes and it's lunchtime. Thank you.